The dusty streets of Watsonville, California, had never felt so suffocating as they did the morning. Natalie Zimmerman walked home from the church with her engagement ring still in her pocket, and her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was the spring of 1882, and the scandal that would follow her for months to come had just begun. Though she didn't yet know the full extent of the shame her family would heap upon her shoulders for refusing to marry a man who had shown his true colors the night before their wedding. She had discovered Thomas Whitfield, her intended, in a compromising position with her own cousin at the engagement party. His hands where they shouldn't be, and his promises revealed as hollow as a rotted tree trunk. When Natalie confronted him, he had laughed, told her she was being dramatic, that men had certain needs and she should be grateful he was willing to marry her at all. The words had cut deeper than any knife, but not as deep as her mother's reaction when Natalie refused to go through with the ceremony. "You will make us the laughingstock of this entire town," her mother had hissed, her face pale with rage. Thomas Whitfield comes from one of the wealthiest families in the county. Do you think anyone else will want you now? A woman of 22 with a broken engagement. Her father had been worse, refusing to even look at her, turning his back as though she had committed some unforgivable sin. Her 2 younger sisters whispered behind closed doors, their eyes filled with judgment when they passed her in the hallway of their family home. The wedding had been called off, and the Zimmerman family had become the subject of every piece of gossip from the general store to the saloon. 3 weeks had passed since that terrible day, and Natalie found herself more isolated than ever. The few friends she had possessed had slowly stopped calling, their own reputations too precious to risk on association with a woman who had spurned a good match. Her mother barely spoke to her, except to remind her of her failings, and her father had taken to leaving the room whenever she entered. It was on a particularly difficult morning, after her mother had spent breakfast listing all the ways Natalie had disappointed the family, that she decided she needed to escape the house. She tied on her bonnet, ignored her mother's sharp question about where she thought she was going, and walked out into the bright California sunshine. Watsonville was a growing agricultural town, surrounded by apple orchards and berry fields that stretched toward the distant mountains. The main street bustled with activity, wagons rolling past, merchants calling out their wares, and women in their finest dresses promenading arm in arm. Natalie kept her head down, painfully aware of the stares that followed her, the whispers that started as soon as she passed. She walked until she reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, and the noise faded to something more bearable. There was a creek that ran through the area, lined with willow trees that offered shade and solitude. She had come here as a child, and now she sought it out like a refuge. Natalie sat on a flat rock near the water's edge, finally allowing herself to cry. She wasn't weeping for Thomas, that much she knew. She was crying for the life she had thought she would have, for the family who had turned their backs on her for having the courage to stand up for herself, for the loneliness that seemed to stretch out endlessly before her. "Didn't mean to intrude, miss, but are you all right?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly fell off the rock. She looked up to find a man standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. His clothes marked him as a working man, a cowboy by the look of his worn leather chaps and the dust that covered his boots. His eyes, a striking gray blue, held genuine concern. "I'm fine," Natalie said automatically, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "I didn't realize anyone else came out here. I work at the Patterson Ranch, just over that hill," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the east. "Sometimes I come down here on my break to water my horse, Didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me," Natalie said, surprised to find she meant it. There was something calming about his presence, something that didn't feel judgmental or harsh. "I'm Natalie." "Garrett Kane," he said, and a small smile crossed his face. "Pleased to meet you, though I wish it were under happier circumstances." She let out a laugh that was half sob. "Yes, well, happy circumstances have been in short supply lately." Garrett didn't press her for details, which she appreciated. Instead, he led his horse, a beautiful chestnut mare, down to the creek to drink. He moved with an easy grace, comfortable in his own skin in a way that Natalie envied. There was no pretense about him, no carefully constructed social mask. "You live in town?" he asked after a moment. "Unfortunately," Natalie said, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, that was rude. Yes, I live in town with my family. The Zimmermans." Recognition flickered across his face, and Natalie braced herself for the judgment, the questions, the thinly veiled criticism. But Garrett just nodded slowly. "Heard some talk about that situation," he said carefully. "Seems to me you did the right thing." Natalie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Walking away from a man who didn't respect you," Garrett said, meeting her eyes directly. "That takes courage, more than most people have." The words hit her like a physical force, and fresh tears sprang to her eyes. In 3 weeks, not a single person had told her she had done the right thing. Not her family, not her friends, not even the minister who had tried to convince her to reconsider. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what it means to hear someone say that." They talked for over an hour, sitting by that creek while his horse grazed nearby. Garrett told her about his work at the Patterson Ranch, how he had come to California from Montana 2 years ago looking for better opportunities. He spoke about the cattle drives, the long days under the sun, the satisfaction of good, honest work. Natalie found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone, about her dreams of maybe teaching at the schoolhouse, about her love of reading, about how trapped she felt in a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. "People talk," Garrett said with a shrug. "That's what they do. But their talk doesn't define who you are. Only you get to decide that." When Natalie finally returned home that afternoon, her mother was waiting with a stern lecture about disappearing without explanation and worrying the family. But for the first time in weeks, Natalie felt like she could breathe. She had met someone who saw her as a person, not as a scandal or a disappointment. She returned to the creek the next day, telling herself she just needed the peace and quiet. When Garrett appeared with his horse, she felt a flutter in her chest that she tried to ignore. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said, but he was smiling. "I could say the same," Natalie replied. They fell into an easy pattern over the following weeks. Nearly every afternoon, Natalie would escape to the creek, and Garrett would find a reason to bring his horse down for water. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Garrett never pushed her, never made her feel like she owed him anything. He simply listened, and in listening, he gave her something precious. Validation that her feelings mattered. The attraction between them grew slowly, built on a foundation of genuine friendship and mutual respect. Natalie found herself watching the way Garrett's hands moved when he talked, noticing the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. She caught herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, if he was thinking about her too. One afternoon in early summer, as they sat side by side on their usual rock, Garrett's hand accidentally brushed against hers. The contact sent a jolt through her entire body, and when she looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Natalie," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What is it?" "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words simple and honest. I know it's too soon, and I know you've been through hell, and I don't expect anything from you. But I couldn't keep pretending I don't feel this way. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different from the ones she had shed before. These were tears of relief, of joy, of something that felt almost like hope. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Garrett reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was infinitely gentle. When he leaned in to kiss her, Natalie met him halfway, and the world seemed to fall away around them. The kiss was soft and sweet, nothing like the demanding kisses Thomas had forced on her. This was a question, an offering, a promise of something better. When they finally pulled apart, Natalie was smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. "What are we going to do?" she asked, reality crashing back in. "My family barely tolerates me as it is. If they find out I'm seeing someone, especially a cowboy with no family name or fortune, they'll be furious." "I don't care what your family thinks," Garrett said firmly. "I care about you, and if you'll have me, I'll stand by you no matter what anyone says." The words were exactly what she needed to hear. "I don't care what they think either," Natalie said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. She had spent her whole life trying to please her family, trying to fit into the mold they had created for her. Where had that gotten her? She had been willing to marry a man she didn't love because it was expected, and she had nearly destroyed herself in the process. They agreed to meet openly, to stop hiding as though they had something to be ashamed of. When Natalie walked into town the next day with Garrett at her side, the gossip exploded like a powder keg. By evening, her mother was in hysterics. "Have you completely lost your mind?" her mother shrieked. "First you ruin yourself by breaking off a perfectly good engagement, and now you're parading around with some common ranch hand. What is wrong with you?" "Nothing is wrong with me," Natalie said, standing her ground. "Garrett is a good man, a decent man. He treats me with respect and kindness." "That's more than Thomas ever did. Respect and kindness don't pay the bills," her father interjected coldly. "That cowboy has nothing to offer you, no property, no prospects, no standing in this community." "He offers me love," Natalie said. "He offers me a chance at happiness." "Isn't that worth something? Love." Her mother spat the word like it was poison. "Love fades, Natalie. Status, security, those things last. You are being incredibly foolish and selfish. Think about your sisters. How are they supposed to make good matches when their older sister is disgracing the family name?" The argument went on for hours, with her parents taking turns berating her choices and her character. Her sisters watched from the doorway, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and fascination. When Natalie finally retreated to her room, she felt exhausted but strangely free. She had spoken her truth, and while it hadn't changed anything, it had felt powerful. The following Sunday, Garrett appeared at the Zimmerman house dressed in his best clothes, which while clean and pressed were still clearly the outfit of a working man. He knocked on the door and asked Mr. Zimmerman's permission to formally court Natalie. Her father looked Garrett up and down with barely concealed contempt. "Absolutely not. My daughter will not be courted by someone of your station. You have nothing to offer her." "With respect, sir, I have a steady job, a good work ethic, and genuine affection for your daughter," Garrett said calmly. "I may not have a fortune, but I can provide for her. More importantly, I'll treat her the way she deserves to be treated." "Get off my property," Mr. Zimmerman said, his voice like ice. "And stay away from Natalie. If I see you near her again, I'll have the sheriff run you out of town." Garrett met Natalie's eyes over her father's shoulder. She could see the frustration there, but also the determination. He tipped his hat to her and left without another word. That night, Natalie's parents presented her with an ultimatum. Either she stopped seeing Garrett immediately, or she would no longer be welcome in their home. They gave her until morning to decide. Natalie lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom. The choice before her was terrifying in its finality. If she chose Garrett, she would be completely alone, cut off from her family and their financial support. She had no money of her own, no means of supporting herself. But if she gave up Garrett, she would be giving up the first real happiness she had known in years, maybe ever. When dawn broke, she knew what she had to do. She packed a single bag with her most practical clothes and the few personal items that meant something to her. She left behind the fancy dresses her mother had bought her, the jewelry that had been gifts from relatives, all the trappings of the life she was leaving behind. She wrote a short note explaining her decision and left it on her pillow. Natalie walked out of her family home as the sun rose over Watsonville, her heart pounding but her steps sure. She made her way to the Patterson ranch, where she found Garrett already up and working with the horses in the corral, his face transformed when he saw her. "Natalie, what are you doing here so early?" "I chose you," she said simply. "My parents gave me an ultimatum and I chose you. I don't know what happens next, but I know I want to face it with you." Garrett vaulted over the corral fence and swept her into his arms, lifting her off the ground. "You're sure? Once you do this, there's no going back." "I'm sure," Natalie said, and kissed him to prove it. The next few weeks were challenging but also exhilarating. Mrs. Patterson, the ranch owner's wife, was a kind woman who had heard about Natalie's situation. She offered Natalie a job helping with the household work and gave her a small room in the ranch house. The work was harder than anything Natalie had done before, her hands quickly developing blisters from washing clothes and scrubbing floors, but she found satisfaction in the labor. She was earning her own keep, dependent on no one but herself. Garrett courted her properly, despite the unconventional circumstances. He brought her wildflowers he picked on his rides, taught her to ride horses, and spent his evenings sitting with her on the ranch house porch, talking until the stars came out. The other ranch hands initially viewed her with curiosity, but she won them over with her willingness to work hard and her genuine kindness. Mr. Patterson, a gruff man in his 50s, seemed to respect Garrett's dedication to his work, despite the drama in his personal life. "You're a good worker, Kane," he said one evening. "And that girl of yours has backbone. Anyone who'd walk away from comfort to follow her heart has my respect." In town, the gossip reached new heights. The story of Natalie Zimmerman, who had first broken off an engagement to a wealthy man and then run off with a cowboy, became the scandal of the season. Natalie heard the whispers when she went to the general store, saw the way proper ladies crossed the street to avoid her. Her former friends looked through her as though she didn't exist. The hardest part was seeing her family. Once, she passed her mother and sisters on the street. Her sisters looked away quickly, but her mother's eyes met hers for a brief moment. The pain and anger there nearly broke Natalie's resolve, but then she felt Garrett's hand at the small of her back, steadying her, and she remembered why she had made her choice. Her father made good on his threat to involve the sheriff, accusing Garrett of corrupting his daughter. Sheriff Donovan was a fair man, though, and after speaking with both Natalie and Garrett separately, he told Mr. Zimmerman that Natalie was of age and had made her choice freely. There was nothing illegal about their relationship, no matter how much the Zimmermans disapproved. 3 months after Natalie left home, Garrett took her on a ride up into the hills above the ranch. They stopped at an overlook that provided a stunning view of the valley below, the town of Watsonville, a small cluster of buildings in the distance. "I've been saving my wages for 2 years now," Garrett said, dismounting and helping Natalie down from her horse. "I was planning to buy a small piece of land, start my own ranch eventually. It's not much, just a dream really, but it's something to work toward." "That sounds wonderful," Natalie said, imagining a life where she and Garrett had their own place, their own home. "The thing is," Garrett continued, taking both her hands in his, "that dream doesn't mean much to me anymore if you're not in it. Natalie Zimmerman, I know we haven't known each other that long, and I know I can't offer you the kind of life you were born to, but I love you with everything I am. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. It wasn't fancy, no diamond or elaborate setting, just a plain circle of gold that had probably cost him a month's wages. To Natalie, it was more beautiful than any jewel. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Garrett slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak. They held each other as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Natalie felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Mrs. Patterson stood up as Natalie's witness, and one of Garrett's fellow ranch hands stood up for him. The minister who performed the ceremony was different from the one at Natalie's family church, an older man who smiled kindly and talked about love as the greatest of all virtues. Natalie had sent an invitation to her family, knowing they wouldn't come but feeling she should extend the olive branch. She was right. They didn't attend, and no message came wishing her well. It hurt, that final confirmation that they had truly cut her off, but Garrett's presence beside her, his hand gripping hers tightly, reminded her that she was building a new family now. The Pattersons threw them a small reception at the ranch, and the other ranch workers contributed what they could. Someone played a fiddle, and Garrett danced with his new wife under the stars, holding her close and whispering in her ear how happy she made him. That night, in the small cabin that Mr. Patterson had given them as a wedding gift, Garrett carried Natalie over the threshold and made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. This was what it was supposed to be like, she realized. Not duty or obligation, but genuine desire and mutual affection. In Garrett's arms, she finally understood what she had been missing. The first year of their marriage was hard in many ways. Money was tight, and they had to be careful with every penny. Natalie continued to help Mrs. Patterson with the household work, and Garrett worked from sunrise to sunset managing the cattle and horses. But they were happy, genuinely and completely happy. They had each other, and that was enough. Natalie occasionally saw her family in town. Her mother would turn away immediately, but once she caught her youngest sister, Emma, watching her with something that looked like longing. Natalie smiled at her, hoping to convey that she was all right, that she was happy, but Emma hurried away before Natalie could approach. In the spring of 1883, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. She and Garrett had talked about children, but the reality of bringing a baby into their modest circumstances was daunting. When she told Garrett, though, his face lit up like the sun. "We're going to have a baby," he said, picking her up and spinning her around. "Natalie, that's wonderful. We can barely afford to feed ourselves," she said, voicing her fears. "How are we going to manage with a child? We'll figure it out," Garrett said confidently. "Together, we can figure out anything." He was right. With help from the Pattersons and careful budgeting, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Garrett built a cradle with his own hands, working on it in the evenings after his ranch duties were done. Mrs. Patterson gave them baby clothes her own children had worn years ago. The other ranch wives offered advice and support, creating a community that Natalie had never experienced in her own family. When Natalie went into labor on a cold November night, it was Mrs. Patterson and the local midwife who attended her, along with Garrett, who refused to leave her side. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Natalie thought she couldn't endure another minute. But Garrett held her hand, wiped her forehead, and told her over and over how strong she was, how proud he was of her. Their son was born just before dawn, his lusty cries announcing his arrival. Garrett wept when the midwife placed the baby in his arms, and Natalie fell in love all over again watching her husband cradle their child with such wonder and tenderness. They named him James, after Garrett's father who had passed away years before. James Kane was a healthy, hungry baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Holding him, Natalie felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. The joy was tempered by sadness that her family would never know their grandson. She sent word of James's birth, thinking surely the arrival of a baby would soften their hearts. But no response came, and Natalie had to accept that the rift might never heal. Life settled into a new rhythm with James. Natalie stayed home to care for him while Garrett worked, though she still helped Mrs. Patterson when she could, bringing James along. The baby became a favorite of everyone on the ranch, passed from arm to arm during gatherings, cooed over and spoiled by people who had become more family than Natalie's blood relations ever were. When James was 6 months old, something unexpected happened. Natalie was in town buying supplies when she nearly collided with her sister Emma outside the general store. Emma was alone without their mother for once, and she stood frozen, staring at Natalie. "Emma," Natalie said softly. "How are you?" "I'm well," Emma said, her voice barely audible. She glanced around nervously as though afraid of being seen. "I heard you had a baby, a boy." "Yes, James, he's beautiful, Emma, he's perfect." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss you so much. The house is terrible without you. Mother is angry all the time and father won't talk about you at all. Margaret married last month and it was so joyless. No one was happy." Natalie's heart ached for her sister. "I'm sorry you're unhappy, but I'm not sorry for the choice I made." "I know," Emma said, "and I think you were right. I think you were brave. Thomas Whitfield got another girl pregnant last year, did you know? A merchant's daughter. He refused to marry her and her family had to send her away. You were right about him." The vindication should have felt satisfying, but Natalie just felt sad. "I hope she's all right." "Natalie," Emma said urgently, looking around again. "I can't stay long, but I wanted you to know that I don't agree with them. Mother and father, I mean. What they did to you was wrong. You deserved better." "Thank you," Natalie said, reaching out to squeeze her sister's hand. "That means more than you know." "Could I?" Emma hesitated. "Could I maybe come see you sometime, meet your baby? I wouldn't tell mother and father." "Of course," Natalie said immediately. "Come to the Patterson Ranch any time. You're always welcome." They parted quickly, Emma hurrying away before anyone could see them together. But the encounter left Natalie feeling lighter than she had in months. She hadn't lost all her family after all. At least one person still cared. True to her word, Emma began visiting the ranch every few weeks, always careful to time her visits when their parents thought she was elsewhere. She fell in love with James immediately, and Natalie cherished these stolen moments with her sister. Emma confided that she was being courted by a banker's son, someone their parents approved of but who Emma found boring and presumptuous. "Don't marry him if you don't love him," Natalie urged. "Please, Emma, don't make the mistake I almost made." "But what else can I do?" Emma asked helplessly. "I'm not brave like you. I can't just walk away." "You're braver than you think," Natalie said, "and you have more choices than you realize." As James grew from baby to toddler, life on the ranch continued. Garrett's hard work and dedication didn't go unnoticed, and Mr. Patterson promoted him to foreman, which came with better pay and more responsibility. With the increased income, Garrett was able to save more aggressively toward his dream of owning land. In 1885, when James was 2 years old, an opportunity arose. A neighboring farmer was selling 40 acres, including a small house and barn. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Garrett and Natalie walked the property together, imagining what they could build there. "We could run some cattle," Garrett said, his eyes alight with possibilities. "Maybe some chickens, plant a vegetable garden. It would be ours, Natalie. Really ours." "Let's do it," Natalie said. The decision felt monumental and right. They bought the land with their savings and a loan from Mr. Patterson, who believed in Garrett's abilities. Moving from the cabin on the Patterson ranch to their own property felt like the beginning of something new. The house needed work, and the barn was in rough shape, but it was theirs. Garrett continued working at the Patterson ranch while building up their own small operation. Natalie threw herself into making their house a home, gardening, learning to preserve food, and caring for James. Some days were exhausting and money remained tight, but they were building something together, creating a legacy for their son. Emma visited their new home and was amazed at what they had accomplished. "You're really doing it," she said in wonder. "You're making your own life on your own terms." "So can you," Natalie told her. It took another year, but Emma finally found the courage to reject the banker's son. Her parents were furious, but Emma stood firm. She began working at the schoolhouse as a teacher's assistant, earning her own small income. While she still lived at home, she had tasted independence, and Natalie could see the change in her sister. In the fall of 1886, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news brought only joy. They were in a better position now with their own land and a growing operation. When their daughter was born the following spring, they named her Catherine, and James was delighted to have a little sister. Catherine's birth brought another unexpected visitor. Natalie's mother appeared at their door one afternoon, her face drawn and older than Natalie remembered. Natalie stood frozen in the doorway, Catherine in her arms, unsure what to expect. "I heard you had a daughter," her mother said stiffly. "I wanted to see her." Natalie stepped back, allowing her mother inside. The visit was awkward, filled with long silences and careful words. But her mother held Catherine, and Natalie saw tears in her eyes. "You look well," her mother finally said. "Happy." "I am," Natalie replied honestly. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," her mother admitted. "He's still angry, he may always be angry, but I'm tired, Natalie. I'm tired of being angry, tired of missing my daughter." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was something. Over the following months, her mother's visits became more regular, though she always came alone and kept the visits secret from Natalie's father. The relationship was tentative, scarred by the years of estrangement, but it was a beginning. Garrett never complained about the complicated situation with Natalie's family. He welcomed her mother politely, gave her space to rebuild her relationship with Natalie and the children, and never demanded that Natalie choose between them. His quiet support meant everything to Natalie. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their family. James grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of horses and cattle. Catherine was spirited and fearless, keeping her parents on their toes. In 1889, they welcomed another son whom they named William. Their ranch slowly prospered. It would never make them wealthy, but they had enough. More importantly, they had each other, and the love between Garrett and Natalie only deepened with time. Even after years of marriage, Natalie would catch Garrett watching her across the dinner table or while she worked in the garden, his eyes full of warmth and devotion. "What are you thinking?" she asked him one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset while their children played in the yard. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Garrett said, pulling her close. "I'm thinking about that day by the creek when I found you crying, and how my whole life changed in that moment." "Mine too," Natalie said, leaning into him. "I was so lost then, you saved me." "No," Garrett said firmly. "You saved yourself. You had the courage to walk away from a life that would have destroyed you. All I did was love you." "That was everything," Natalie whispered. In 1890, 8 years after their wedding, Natalie received word that her father had died. The funeral was a somber affair, and Natalie attended with Garrett at her side. Her mother embraced her publicly for the first time in years, and while there were still townspeople who looked at them with judgment, there were also many who had come to respect what Garrett and Natalie had built together. After the funeral, Natalie's mother made a confession. "Your father regretted what happened," she said quietly. "He never said it out loud, but I could see it. Especially after he met your children that one time when you didn't know he was watching from across the street. He saw what a good father Garrett is, what a good life you've built. He was too proud to admit he was wrong, but I think he knew it." The words brought Natalie both sadness and a measure of peace. She had never needed her father's approval to know she had made the right choice, but knowing he had perhaps come to understand meant something. As their children grew older, Garrett and Natalie told them the story of how they met, how their mother had been brave enough to choose love over social expectations, how their father had been willing to face the world's judgment for the woman he loved. James, Catherine, and William grew up knowing that real strength came from following your heart and standing by the people you love. Emma eventually married a kind schoolteacher, someone she genuinely loved, and their mother attended the wedding with a smile. The scandal of Natalie's broken engagement and elopement faded into history, replaced by new gossip and new dramas. Some people in town never forgave Natalie for her choices, but many came to see her and Garrett as an example of true partnership. The ranch continued to grow slowly but steadily. Garrett proved to have a gift for breeding horses, and the Kane Ranch became known for producing quality stock. Natalie started teaching local children their letters and numbers, holding informal classes at their home for families who couldn't afford formal schooling. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised Natalie with a gift. He had saved for months to buy her a beautiful mare, a dappled gray with intelligent eyes and a gentle temperament. "She's yours," he said, watching Natalie's face light up. "I know you've been riding the older horses, but I wanted you to have one that was special, just yours." Natalie threw her arms around him, tears in her eyes. "You're too good to me." "Impossible," Garrett said, kissing her forehead. "I could never be good enough for you." They rode out together that evening, just the two of them, leaving the children with a neighboring family. They returned to the creek where they had first met, now a place they visited regularly throughout their marriage. Sitting on the same rock where Garrett had first asked if she was all right, they watched the water flow past and reflected on how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Garrett asked. "Giving up your family's money and status, it hasn't been an easy life." "Not for a single moment," Natalie said without hesitation. "This life, our life, it's exactly what I wanted even when I didn't know I wanted it. You gave me freedom, Garrett, freedom to be myself, to make my own choices, to live authentically. That's worth more than all the money in the world." "You gave me purpose," Garrett replied. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, working jobs and moving from place to place. You made me want to build something, to be someone worthy of you." "You were always worthy," Natalie said, cupping his face in her hands. "Always." They made love that night under the stars, beside the creek where their story began, and Natalie felt grateful for every choice that had led her to this moment. As the 1890s progressed, their children grew into remarkable young people. James inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's intelligence, already talking about expanding the ranch when he was old enough. Catherine proved to be a talented artist, filling notebooks with sketches of horses and landscapes. William, the youngest, had a gift for music and could coax beautiful melodies from the old piano Garrett had bought from a traveling merchant. Natalie's mother became a regular presence in their lives, doting on her grandchildren and slowly healing the rift that had once seemed unbridgeable. She admitted to Natalie that watching her daughter's genuine happiness had changed her perspective on many things. "I was raised to believe that security and status were the most important things," she said one afternoon while helping Natalie with canning. "But watching you and Garrett, seeing how you've built this life together, I understand now that I was wrong. Love matters, respect matters, partnership matters. You have all those things and they've made you richer than any of us." The validation, coming so many years later, still touched Natalie deeply. "Thank you, Mother. That means a great deal to me." In 1895, 13 years after their wedding, Natalie and Garrett welcomed their fourth child, a daughter they named Rose. James was now 12, Catherine 8, and William 6, and they were all thrilled to have a baby in the house again. Rose's arrival felt like a blessing, a symbol of the abundant life they had created together. On a warm summer evening in 1897, the Kane family gathered on their porch for dinner. The children, now ranging from toddler to teenager, filled the space with noise and laughter. Natalie watched them with pride and joy, marveling at the family she and Garrett had built. Garrett caught her eye across the table and smiled, that same warm smile that had first made her heart flutter 15 years ago. He had gray threading through his dark hair now, and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Natalie, he was as handsome as the day she met him. After dinner, when the children were occupied with their own activities, Garrett pulled Natalie into his arms and danced with her in the kitchen, humming a melody. "What's this for?" Natalie asked, laughing. "Do I need a reason to dance with my beautiful wife?" Garrett replied. "I'm not the young woman you married anymore," Natalie said, though she was smiling. "4 children and 15 years of hard work have taken their toll." "You're more beautiful now than you were then," Garrett said seriously. "Every year with you makes you more precious to me. Every challenge we've faced together, every joy we've shared, it all adds up to a life I wouldn't trade for anything." "I love you," Natalie said, the words as heartfelt as the first time she had spoken them. "I love you so much, Garrett Kane." "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the California sky in brilliant colors, Natalie reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the frightened, ashamed young woman who had sat crying by a creek, convinced her life was over. She thought about the courage it had taken to walk away from everything she knew, the fear and uncertainty of those early days. But mostly she thought about the man who had seen her, truly seen her, and loved her not despite her circumstances, but because of the strength she had shown in facing them. Garrett had never cared what her family thought, had never cared about her broken engagement or her lack of dowry. He had cared about her, about who she was as a person, and that had made all the difference. Their children would grow up knowing they came from love, from a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They would know that real courage meant following your heart, even when the world told you it was wrong. They would know that family was sometimes the one you chose, not the one you were born into. As Natalie stood in Garrett's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together, She knew with absolute certainty that every difficult moment, every judgment, every sacrifice had been worth it. She had found her place in the world, and it was here, on this ranch, with this man and these children. The broken engagement that had once brought her family such shame had led her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. And the cowboy who hadn't cared what families thought had given her a family worth treasuring, a love worth fighting for, and a life worth living. In the distance, she could hear James teaching William how to rope a fence post while Catherine sang to baby Rose. The sounds of her family, her real family, filled the evening air. Natalie looked up at Garrett, this man who had stood by her through everything, and knew that whatever challenges the future brought, they would face them together. Their story had started with heartbreak and scandal, but it had transformed into something beautiful. It was a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, of having the courage to defy expectations, and of finding someone who would stand beside you no matter what the world thought. As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, Garrett kissed Natalie softly, and she kissed him back with all the love in her heart. Their children's laughter drifted on the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, horses whinnied in the corral. This was home. This was happiness. This was everything she had never known she was brave enough to reach for, and everything she would cherish for the rest of her days.